that what the gospel writers did was write down accounts of what they thought and what they imagined was beneficial. They selected statements of Jesus. And they selected events that they imagined or that they thought had taken place in the life of Jesus, and they selected it according to what they believed was appropriate. But these gospel writers themselves admit that there are many teachings of Jesus, and many accounts have been written of the life of Jesus. They have selected what they deemed was appropriate. Now, that sort of makes one curious. I wonder what the other accounts of the life of Jesus and the sayings of Jesus said. That means that there were other people writing other books, writing other gospels, writing other accounts of the life of Jesus that they felt appropriate, that they felt was appropriate and they felt was correct. Now that begs the question, well, how do we know the ones that we've got are the right ones? How do we know that Matthew, Mark, Luke and John and the Acts of the Apostles and those letters actually truly reflect what Jesus said and what Jesus did? So we might want to go back in history and start examining and trying to find out, who is Matthew, Mark, Luke and John? How did these Gospels come to be in the Bible? How did they come to be selected? How did they come to be chosen? How did this account of the life of Jesus come to us today? Now, it really gets very interesting when we start to examine and study that. One of the amazing things, and I discovered this relatively recently, is that all the original Gospels, that what we now call Matthew, Mark, Luke and John, were distributed anonymously, meaning the actual names Matthew and the name Mark and the name Luke and the name John were never on the documents, the old and ancient documents that we have. There was no name ascribed to them. The name Matthew, Mark, Luke and John, the names given to those Gospels, were actually attributed many, many years later. In fact, the earliest written statement that we have attributing authorship to the Gospels was as late as 300 years after the time of Jesus. So a man called Eusebius, who's one of the early Christian, when I say early, he was writing about 300 years after the time of Jesus. He claimed that another man called Irenaeus had said that this gospel was written by this person and this gospel was written by that person. But of course the writings of Irenaeus have not survived. And Irenaeus was writing about 125 years after the time of Jesus. So think about that. Think about that. That's like a bit like having the only copies of the American Declaration of Independence. Imagine that. The American Declaration of Independence, the only copies of it are 300 years later after the event. All we have in terms of manuscript evidence, and this is another point, in terms of actual manuscript evidence, the evidence is very sparse.
What a lot of rubbish. Come on, tell the truth to the people here.
What a load of rubbish, tell the truth to the people here. That's exactly what I'm doing. Okay? Okay. So, in fact, you know what? It doesn't matter. Because you know what? You can't make the blind see. You can't make the deaf hear. You can't. And people whose hearts they are dead, you can't bring them to life. Okay? So it's not our job really to make anyone believe anything. Our job is to present to people the facts. Believe me, I have absolutely no interest in telling one single lie. Not a single interest in telling a single lie. Absolutely not. Everything I have said so far can be proven historically. You can read what scholars have said, and these are not Muslim scholars. These are people who are non-Muslim, who attribute themselves to the Western Christian tradition. Of course, Christian fundamentalists would not call them Christians. But as we're going to see, the earliest fragments that exist of the actual gospel manuscripts are very small. I mean, they are a couple of lines. That's all we have. The largest sizable manuscript evidence that we have of the Gospels do not appear until over 100 years after the time of Jesus. There is a man called Constantine Tischendorf. He lived in the 19th century. It was his life's ambition to find the most ancient, complete biblical manuscript. This was his life's ambition. And he searched throughout the whole world to try and find the most ancient biblical manuscript. And he did, he found it. He found it in St. Catherine's Monastery in the Sinai. And it's now housed in the British Museum. It's called the Codex Sinaiticus. The Codex Sinaiticus. The oldest complete biblical manuscript. And that manuscript is dated 325 years after the time of Jesus. And it is not even a complete biblical manuscript, because what we find in it are some gospels, a gospel according to the shepherd Hermes. Have you ever heard of the gospel of the shepherd Hermes? I doubt it. You won't find it in any modern Bible. There's also an epistle of Barnabas that you will not find in any modern Bible. Okay?